great to have you. Great to have you. I appreciate the presence of every one of you as we travel through space and time together, remembering, wondering, philosophising. So it's almost time for another stop on my love letter to the world. This one's about Charlemagne, a figure without whom the story of Europe would have been utterly different. But before we get to that point, can I just remind you all about my patreon.com site and the necessity to go there and, if possible, support the series. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee, really. But you get early access to the new content, exclusive access to a question and answer session, and I would love to see you there. Come and join the family. Okay, it's now time to strap into the time machine as we hurtle towards the next stop on my love letter to the world. Cue the music. Distilled from barbarian stock, harried by Islam to the south and by Vikings to the north, a man of war, a formidable force and a conqueror supreme, king among Franks, fighting to build a vast kingdom stretching from Scandinavia to the Adriatic, crowned emperor by Pope Leo III, the Holy Roman Empire was born. Endeavouring to understand history in hopes of illuminating the future, I'm Neil Oliver, and this is my love letter to the world.
Hi Neil. In the last episode we travelled with you to the wild, windswept island of Lindisfarne, where the Vikings wrote themselves into the history books. Which moment in history are we heading to this week?
Hi Paul. Well, it's 800 AD at this moment in time, and we're leaving behind the beautiful east coast of England and travelling across what at this time was a rough, tough, ragged European mainland. We're on our way to St. Peter's in Rome, where Charlemagne, the big man himself, is about to kneel down and be crowned emperor by the Pope. Short answer to the question is we're in the court of Charlemagne. It's in Aachen, in North Westphalia. It's all very Germanic. Last week we were on Lindisfarne with the advent of the Vikings. You know, the sudden dramatic arrival of the peoples of Scandinavia and the impact that they made and then continued to make on Europe for hundreds of years, and they've never gone. They're marbled through the stuff of Europe and further afield, like lettering through Blackpool rock. And so we talked about Charles Martel the week before that, and the turning back of the Umayyad Caliphate, the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate at the Battle of Tours in 732. Well, Charles Martel was the father of Pepin the Short, and Pepin the Short was the father of Charlemagne, and Charlemagne means Big Charlie, basically Big Charles the Great, however you want to translate it.
Was he tall?
Well, yeah, absolutely. What we're dealing with here, specifically, really the moment, is he was crowned emperor, Holy Roman Emperor, on Christmas Day, 800 AD, by Pope Leo III, in the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome. It's a big event. Charlemagne came to literacy late in life. You know, he learned to read and write, you know, when he was a mature man. Up until that point, he hadn't had the gift of literacy. But when he became aware of it, he understood profoundly the value of men of learning. And so he gathered around him at Aachen all the smartest guys he could find. And one of them was a layman called Einhard. He was of Germanic descent, that part of Europe, and he was the court biographer. He kept a running commentary going about what Charlemagne was getting up to. And when he described him, when he wrote about Charlemagne at that crowning, that coronation in the Basilica at St. Peter's, he described Charlemagne as large and strong and of lofty stature. So a big guy, you know, Big Charlie. They didn't call him that for nothing. It wasn't ironic. They were being descriptive. Einhard said that his eyes were large and animated, and that his gait, his walk, was firm and his whole carriage manly. let's indulge ourselves in the thought that he looked the part. You know, if you're going to crown someone Holy Roman Emperor, you want him to look like that. You'd want him to have that way about him. Oddly enough, though, it's described there and elsewhere that Charlemagne's voice was quite high pitched, and not what you'd expect. You know, he might have been maybe picture somebody like Sean Connery in his prime, but he didn't sound like Sean. I think he had more of a squeaky voice, and he kept a long and luxuriant moustache as well, which, you know, take it or leave it. I suppose that's going to appeal to some people and not appeal to others.
Does being the Holy Roman Emperor, is that just a religious thing?
Well, it's all part of the significance of the moment. Let's rewind a little bit. It was a political act making him Holy Roman Emperor on the part of Pope Leo III. Earlier in the year before, in 799, Pope Leo had been attacked by Romans, because he was in Rome, Romans in Rome, and those that came after him, they were planning to pluck out his eyes and cut out his tongue. And he gave them the slip, and he ran for the protection of Charlemagne. So he fled Rome and sought out Charlemagne as his protector, and that alliance was there. And Charlemagne counselled him to return to Rome, which he did, and he reclaimed and re-established his position there. And the way it was set up, the way it was described, it was as though Charlemagne just happened to be at Mass on Christmas Day in the Basilica, and all spontaneous like, Pope Leo just said, "Hey, since you're here, let's make you emperor." You know, that's how it's described, as though it was just a coming together, a flash of inspiration on the part of the Pope. But, you know, logic dictates that it must have been something that was organised and planned, you know, weeks and months in advance. But this is how it's portrayed. But by 800 AD, the glory days of Western Rome, the Western Roman Empire, were long gone. And this is really what's fascinating to think about. You know, we indulge ourselves in Europe that, you know, we're kind of a centre of civilization, which we have been for a long time, but not in 800 AD we weren't. Rome had brought Roman civilization, and that lasted for the centuries of the Western Roman Empire. But when that fell apart, civilization went down the pan, and it was rough. West of the Elbe River, it was rough. You know, you might imagine it as being a kind of a backwater, a brackish lagoon. It was stagnant. It was ruled over, or it was controlled by men who called themselves kings, which I suppose you can call yourself king, but from a practical point of view, they were warlords. They were those individuals, those men who were strong enough to force their will on other people. And they gathered around them and just about kept in control other warlike men. And they used them to get their way, you know, and to push their will on other people. And Charlemagne was one of those. But Europe at that point was now as rough as a badger's arse. It was no civilization. I mean, when we thought about Charles Martel driving the Umayyad Muslim army away from Tours in 732, and eventually he pushed them all the way south of the Pyrenees back into Spain. But the civilization south of the Pyrenees under the Caliphate was orders of magnitude more sophisticated than anything that was in Europe at that time. They were masters of wonderful architecture. The Umayyad Caliphate didn't long outlive the disaster at Tours, and it fell within a couple of decades of 732. It actually was overthrown as a heresy, and it was replaced by the Abbasid Caliphate. And the Abbasid Caliphate was a high point of Islamic culture for all time, actually. The heights of art and culture and learning, there has never been anything as great in the Islamic world since. It was under the Abbasids, for example, that they got to work translating the Greek philosophers and the Greek men of learning, so Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and scores of others, all the manuscripts that the Abbasids could get their hands on that were in Greek, they translated into Arabic. And it was that act of translation that meant that all of that wisdom survived. to then be handed back, or to be handed on into Europe at the time of the Renaissance. Otherwise it would have been lost, or it may have been lost, but it was preserved and was in a fit state to be handed on because of the Abbasid Caliphate. So that was civilization compared to what was going on in the court of Charlemagne in the late 700s and by 800 AD. It was a rough and uncultured place. Charlemagne was descended from Charles Martel via his son Pepin and then Charlemagne. But the forebears of Charles Martel had settled territory that we would understand as Belgium, and then they spread, and some of them colonised or settled in what we know as France, Gaul, as far as they were concerned. And from them, from that line, that bloodline, came the Merovingian kings, who were named after the first of their line, which was Merovech. His grandson, Merovech's grandson, was Clovis I, and he converted to Christianity somewhere around the start of the 6th century. All the way through this story of the world, it's been people on the move, so there were different peoples all around. Surrounding those Franks, those proto-Franks, there were Avars in the east. That's the mob that brought with them the stirrup. They're the first people that we know of that controlled the horse using stirrups from saddles. There were Bretons and Gascons to their west. There were Lombards in the southeast. So people all around. Now those Merovingians were usurped by Pepin of Herstal. He overthrows the Merovingian lineage. He is the father of Charles Martel. Charles Martel is the father of Pepin the Short, and Pepin the Short is the father of Charlemagne. Charles the Great, Big Charlie. And in the years before his coronation in Rome, he was always at war. Charlemagne existed like a shark that just kept swimming rather than stop and drown. He just kept moving. So he took Bavaria, he took Lombardy, he took Saxony, he took other places besides, until he pulled together Europe. And the point is that what Charlemagne pulled together was remembered ever after, and he was crowned as emperor by Leo III in Rome. The crown was put upon his head and he was established. That was the return of the Roman Empire in the West, and it's now holy. It's Holy Roman Empire, anointed by the Pope, anointed by God. And although it didn't outlive him, although it began to break up again, it is what everyone ever since has sought to recreate, right down to and including the European Union. The EU is yet another attempt to reunite the Europeans in the same way that Charlemagne had done. And when I mentioned that it was politically astute, or it was politically important that Leo did what he did, for a couple of reasons. We've run across this before. By indulging himself with making him emperor, making him the Holy Roman Emperor, Pope Leo is also saying, I'm actually on top of this. I'm in number one position because I get to put the crown on his head, not the other way round. I make him, he doesn't make me. So it was another of those instances where the church was reminding everyone that it was top dog. It's that tussle that keeps happening. Is it earthly power or is it divine power? It's another of those moments where the Pope says, it's us, it's the church, we're in charge. But it also mattered because out east, remember, there's still an empire in the east centred on Constantinople. But there, as far as Rome is concerned, the faith is sliding. It's come adrift in many, many ways, but you might summarise it by saying, in the east, Jesus was regarded as the Son of God, but he was not equal to God. He was God's son, so he was that little bit less than God as far as the Eastern Church was concerned. And that was heretical as far as the church in Rome was concerned, which had agreed since the Nicene Creed, Constantine and all of that God and Jesus, and indeed the Holy Spirit, had all been there at the beginning. They'd always all been there. So none had primacy above the other. And certainly, Jesus was not less than God. They were one. and that trinity came together as one thing of equal divinity. So there was this schism, there was this separation between East and West. And so Leo III, the Pope, needed to put in place in the West as emperor somebody who thought the same way he did. This is the return of, and the underlining and the reaffirmation of an empire in the West that thinks the way the Western faith has always thought, that God and Jesus are of equal primacy. So it was a very astute political move. According to Einhard, almost as soon as the coronation had taken place, Charlemagne privately thought he had made a mistake in allowing it to happen the way it did, because it made the church his master rather than the other way around. So although he went along with it, according to Einhard, he quickly realised afterwards that I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have allowed that to happen quite that way, because now a hierarchy has been established that I'm not thrilled about.
So it's like warlords, religion, emperors, they're all sort of tussling with each other.
Yeah, it's febrile. I mean, it's unfolding over long periods of time. It's not happening day by day, minute by minute. I mean, it is spread over long periods, but yes, it's what crystallised, what coalesced, what came together under Charlemagne was Europe as we understand it. The empire that he pulled together, the Holy Roman Empire, that frankly was never the same again after he died. But it was a moment of such significance that people never forgot it, and they were always, ever after, for centuries to come, and still to this day, men, people, whatever, are kind of reaching back, trying to get their hands on it again. The determination of the Ursula von der Leyens and the rest to establish with the European Union a centralised, top-down, authoritarian empire in all but name. Whether they're doing it consciously or not, what's manifesting there is the same ambition that was there with Charlemagne. That's ever since he did it, and although it only really existed in that sort of perfect form while he was alive, in all the centuries since his death, people have sought that unity again, or some people have. That desire to create a European empire is Charlemagne's legacy. I mean, he was quite the guy. I mean, there's just no getting away from it. As I say, he came to learning later in life. He loved to swim, and so he based his court at Aachen, where there were warm springs. A bit like Bath, but not as good. So he had a base of operations there, and he attracted towards him all sorts of men of learning. So there's Einhard, Alcuin of York. He was the one who wrote that, some of the devastating criticisms of Lindisfarne. When Lindisfarne was sacked and all the monks were killed by the Vikings, it was Alcuin who was amongst those who wrote at the time, "This is punishment. We, as a Christian brotherhood, had this coming, and they had it. This has happened. This hasn't happened by accident. This is God's will." So Alcuin, who was amongst the brightest of the bright of his time, he had been pulled into Charlemagne's orbit as well. And Charlemagne, it's quite touching. He practiced writing all of his life. He had a wax tablet by his bed that he could practice his letters in with a stencil, and then smooth it out again and do it again. So he had that by his bed so that he could practice his writing. He reached out. As well as being a warlord, he was also able to establish diplomatic relations. He was on good terms with the Abbasid Caliphate. He established good relations there, and amongst other gifts that he was sent a white elephant from the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. The big beast was called Abul Abbas. When you say that such and such is a white elephant, as in, it's great, but it's a bit of a it's a bit of an expensive waste of time. If you'd been given a white elephant, it was a great honour to be given a white elephant, so you had to keep it. You couldn't sell it or kill it. You had to keep it. It was a white elephant, but they were enormously expensive and awkward to maintain, and it was that tradition of the caliphs giving these things as presents that we get this idea of that see that building over there, it looks good, but it's a white elephant. It's more expensive to keep than it's actually worth. That's where we get that from. So this is why it's a moment, because it's a moment of enormous significance. Charlemagne being made emperor in that way. He was already a powerful figure, but by being made Holy Roman Emperor and that happening in the Basilica of St. Peter's, and it happening under the hand of the Pope Leo III. What it brought together, what was crystallised in that moment, the Roman Empire in the West was reborn, and upon its foundations, upon those foundations, human beings in Europe have sought to build upon again and again and again. There's a good line from Einhard that we should probably quote when he's describing the coronation. He says, "On the most holy day of the birth of our Lord, the king went to Mass at St. Peter's, and as he knelt in prayer before the altar, Pope Leo set a crown upon his head." Just like that. Just on a whim. While all the Roman populace cried aloud, "Long life and victory to the mighty Charles, the great and pacific Emperor of the Romans, crowned of God." After he had been thus acclaimed, the Pope did homage to him, as had been the custom with the early rulers, and henceforth he dropped the title of Patrician and was called Emperor and Augustus. So reaching all the way back to the high days of Rome, to gild his status as emperor. It's quite the moment.
And how much land did his empire take in?
I don't know the square mileage or the square kilometerage, but he was bordered in the far north by the Scandinavian world. That was beyond his remit, and all the way to the Adriatic in the south. So that whole swathe of territory, north to south, was under Charlemagne, and that was the Holy Roman Empire, and it was never as great again.
The name Charlemagne, it sort of brings to mind a sort of kind of magical court, and
yeah. There's a lovely cadence to the word, isn't there? Charlemagne. It's nice to say, and I mean he's not remembered the way he is for nothing. It's not some kind of lucky happenstance. He deserves to be remembered for his greatness. He was a man of war. He'd come from that. But I mean, his deepest ancestral roots were Roman foederati, which is to say, foederati are those barbarian tribes that were brought into the tent by the Romans. They were made client peoples who would fight Roman battles on behalf of Rome, and then eventually, in the due course of time, they were given rights to be within the empire. So his lineage went all the way back to people that had got into bed with the Romans when the Romans were still in power. So he had that depth to him, to his bloodline. And then, as well as being an acquisitive warlord who conquered territories, he was also this man of learning and culture, and he appreciated all of that. Alcuin of York at Aachen developed, along with other scribes, the Carolingian minuscule, which is like a typeface, if you like. It's not type, obviously, it's handwritten, but it's a style of writing that was praised ever after. It's still praised because of its legibility. Manuscripts written in Carolingian from Charlemagne. Carolingian minuscule was, by the standards of the day, very, very easy to read. And all of that, and being, a Frankish warlord in good terms with the Abbasid Caliphate out east, and receiving white elephants and gathering the brightest men of the age to him. He's worth remembering. Charlemagne's ghost and the greater European land he built casts a spell. Civil war and bloodshed splits the vast empire. Pieces brokered and kingdoms created, east, west and middle Francia. Greed, grasping ambition, sorrow, and Charlemagne's plain blue Frankish cloak. Next time in my love letter to the world. To help support this podcast and to get access to new and exclusive history and comment vodcasts every week, sign up to my Neil Oliver Patreon site. It'd be great to see you there. Check out the Instagram account called Neil Oliver Love Letter. My YouTube channel is simply called The Neil Oliver Channel. And to help build this podcast, please tell your friends about it, get them listening, and write a review to convince the online crowd to join us. For further reading about these moments in time, you could try my book. It's called The Story of the World in 100 Moments, and it's published by Transworld. Neil Oliver's Love Letter to the World is produced by Paul Ratcliffe and Neil Oliver for Catnip Inc. Music's composed by Milo McKinnon. Social media and YouTube producer is Oscar CFR. Additional research is by Evie, Lucian, Archie and Teddy. Finance is by Catherine and Trudy. Post-production is by Althorpe Studios, and the graphics are by Paul Plowman. Thanks for listening. This has been a Catnip Inc. Podcasts production.